Welcome everybody, Shiur number 621. We're learning today Le'ilui Nishmas Moshe Dov ben Rabbi Zizli Nishmas Blima Batra Moshe, and that Yitzchak Yosef ben Miriam Malka should be Machzalus Shuva B'Soich Shar Yisrael. Okay, getting back to a malach of TOFAIR sewing. So we established last time in reference to how many stitches are needed, whereby one has to be chayiv, where one is patur. Let's real quickly to review, chazer over real quickly. We said if one does just one stitch is not a problem. 2 stitches with knots at the ends of the thread would be asur min haTorah. 2 stitches without knots at the end of the threads is asur midrabanan, and 3 stitches even without any knots at the end of the threads would also be asur min haTorah because of the fact it's kayama. The 2 threads, the 2 stitches without the knots at the end of the threads are not kayama, but it's enough to be asur midrabanan. But we see one stitch, sticking it in one time is not a problem. So now the Sefer Ha'Halachos explains to us what exactly is the stitching that's going on over here. In other words, what do I have to be doing? So he explains like this. He says, when we say 2 stitches, there's state firis, when we say 2 stitches, and whereby it could be chayiv with the knots at the end, it could be asur midrabanan if it's only without the knots at the end. But the state firis, when we talk about 2 stitches, whereby we're running into a problem of TOFAIR sewing, is hainu shetoichav machat. One sticks in the needle in machut, of course, the needle with the thread, not just the needle. So again, shetoichav machat imachut derech shnei begadim mitzad echad. They stick in the needle with the thread through two begadim, 2 pieces of material. Let's call it for now mitzad echad on one side. In other words, like we've been talking about till now, that TOFAIR, the isser of TOFAIR sewing, is bringing 2 pieces of material. You talk about begadim, clothing. Okay, we'll call it material for now. 2 pieces of material together, making it into one. So that's what he's saying. When we talk about these 2 stitches or 3 stitches, whatever the case is, but we're talking about again that it's shnei begadim mitzad echad. You have 2 pieces of clothing on one side. In other words, you're bringing 2 pieces of clothing together. In other words, you do the stitch, you do the 2 stitches in and out, through one piece of material, and then through the other piece of material. In other words, they're like side by side. And again, it's making the 2 pieces of material into one, or the beginning stages at least. Whereby we say 2 stitches, again, like we said, the 2 stitches asur midrabanan with the ksharim at the end, with the knots at the end will be deraisa, 3 stitches will be deraisa, but again, you're going in and out with the 2 pieces of material side by side. Now, okay, so that's number 1. So we have to have the 2 pieces of material that are becoming one, and we're sewing it back and forth. Now, but he says an important point he does bring down, b'shem the TOFAIR Yisrael, that which we said 2 stitches is a problem, whether the Rabbanan or the Raisa, depending on what they tied at the end. But where it's a problem is ela imken hiniach begadim zeh al zeh. You have the 2 pieces of material, they put one on top of the other, one exactly right next to the other. Zeh oy zeh eitzel zeh, right? He says one on top of the other, or it's one right next to the other, whereby you're sewing up like a seam or 2 pieces of material together. V'tochav shtei tchiva is machat b'shneim. In other words, he sews in and out 2 stitches or 3 stitches, whatever it is. Aval. But let's say you have a case. Aval im hiniach shnei habegadim zeh b'tzad zeh. Let's say I have 2 pieces of material, right? Let's say I have. Now it sounds. I just want to explain one thing to everybody. It does sound a little bit like, well, come on, we're not going to be doing this on Shabbos. I'm not taking a needle. I'm not taking a thread, and I'm not stitching it into 1. I'm not stitching it into 2. I'm not taking materials. I'm not starting to sew. What is this negate to me? But we're going to see again. It's important to know down the line because we have to talk about various different practical applications, and we have to have the understanding to understand as to what it's all about. We'll see as we get down to the practical application. So now he says, he just finishes off, let's say I have 2 pieces of material. One is on one side and one is on the other side, for example. And then let's say an inch apart. Just to give an example. And I take the needle and I stick it in with the thread. I stick it in once in one material that's on the right, one piece of material
on the right. V'achar kach pam achas, and I stick it in once, well, only one time. Let's stick it in one time, al sfas beged hasheni, into the other material that's on the left side. They might be touching, might not be touching, but whatever. I stick it in once in that material, stick it in once in the other material, and I did nothing. Afal pisha also shtei tfiras, even though you're going to tell me that, well, 1 second, I stuck it in one material once and then the other material once, and I made two stitches. Kevin shekol beged tochav rak pam achas. Since I only stuck it into the material, each piece of material once, and they're both separate. I never brought anything together. There's nothing being done. I just stuck it into the material. So we're going to tell you in such a case, it's still considered one stitch. When we say one stitch, it really means like one sticking in one time the needle and the thread. And again, that's no problem.
Okay, now just to sum it all up, to get a better understanding, just to read it real quickly out of the Sefer Shabbos Home, edition number 1, he says it very nicely, what it's all about in one paragraph. He says like this: it is permitted, it is allowed, however, to draw a thread. He doesn't say the word stitch, but to draw a thread through fabric once, and even to tie the ends together with a permanent type of a knot, with a permitted type of a knot. Let's say the knot was there from before Shabbos, or it was done away. We're going to have to see what tying knots is all about, but I don't want to get into that issue right now. But let's say, for example, the knot, for argument's sake, the knot was there from before Shabbos, right? So the person has a knot, but Lamaisa, now as far as the sewing part, the thread, it's allowed to draw the thread through the fabric once, and even to have it tied, the ends will be tied, let's say from before Shabbos, or whatever, that would still be okay, even though we saw that by having a knot at the ends of the threads. Let's say, assuming it was made before Shabbos, it was done in a way that's allowed to be done in Shabbos, as far as the knot itself goes, which of course we have to see. Nobody should assume that tying knots at the end of a thread is allowed. We have to see how that works and what that's all about when we learn the halachas of kosher in our alternate shiurim. Now, so just to stick it in once, to draw it through one time, and even though we saw that the knot at the end of the thread, the Mishnah Berurah told us, is running into a problem, but that was only when it's 2 stitches. But just drawing it through once, that is okay, because in effect, like we saw in the Sefer Halachos, one draws it through one piece of material, and they draw it through another piece of material is totally separate, not together, not bringing anything together, because drawing a thread through only once is not considered sewing at all. And even though the fact, like the Sefer Halachos said, you have one piece of material on one side and then the other side another piece of material, I just stuck it in once, and each separate, I'm trying to give it over where we could all understand. I did it separately, drew it through one piece of material separately here, and the other piece of material separately over there. Once, that is not considered sewing at all. It has to be done like the Sefer Halachos said, the 2 pieces of material are together, and through my stitching, I'm bringing it together, and I'm sewing it together. I'm sewing the 2 pieces and making it into one. But just sticking it in one piece of material and then into another piece of material, and they have nothing to do with one another, they just happen to be side by side and they're not being pulled together at all, nothing, so that bechlal is not the isser of TOFAIR. Because again, just to keep in mind, he brings it down Moshe Moshe Feinstein, that, like we explained in the beginning, the distinction between tying is the fastening, like we said, the fastening, just real quickly to review, it's important to keep in mind, because we're learning these 2 malachas. Tying is the fastening of 2 items that remain individually identified when tied together. This malacha involves only tying with a knot. Sewing, like we said, is the unification, like we explained, is the unification of 2 pieces into one body. This malacha does not require a knot, but requires that the identities of the individual pieces be submerged. And when one makes stitches and brings them together, that's what's happening. But just by sticking it in one time in each piece, nothing is happening. Okay, we're going to stop here. We'll continue next time. Thank you for listening. Atzlach and bracha. Kol tov.